Hello and welcome to this week's book club for Star Wars Aftermath Empire's End. If you want to join us on this book club from the start of the book, go ahead and click here and it will take you back to the beginning. But if you don't know what this is basically us going through this book a couple of chapters at a time, discussing the themes and the stuff that happens within it, and basically getting to have like a long-form, in-depth discussion about this book. This book is, of course, the third book in a trilogy. If you would like to join us from the beginning of the trilogy, you can go ahead and click on this playlist, and it'll take you all the way back to the beginning to the first Aftermath book. But with that, let's jump into this week's reading. We're discussing chapters 12, 13, and an interlude. And this was an action-packed couple of chapters. There's definitely some kind of thematic changes to get into, but this is going to be another one of those a bit more plot-heavy than character-heavy things, I think, although as per usual, the interlude is chocked full of stuff. But chapter 12, we learn that in our time since we've last seen Nora and Jazz, the two of them have been separated, which is interesting. Just from a writing standpoint, it's kind of, I mean, it's not a huge time jump, but it's always kind of interesting to jump forward. Wendig seems to like to do this a lot, where you'll have a point in the plot, you'll be at, like, say, you'll have, like, A, B, C, and then instead of D, you'll actually go to F, and then he'll explain D and E to you once you're already at F, and sometimes kind of go back and backtrack. And it's an interesting way to handle this kind of thing, because it keeps the story always in the action, right? So he can get right to the meteor part, as in, like, a lot of stuff, not like a meteor. I can't speak super well. But it gets you to the meteor part of the story, and then he can kind of fill in the plot in such a way that it kind of gives you the character's state of mind, which is interesting. I kind of like it just because I like things always being in the middle of whatever's going on, as opposed, I like things that feel a little bit faster paced. It can be jarring. I personally found this chapter a little bit jarring at the start, but I also think that was the point. So it just becomes a preference thing, whether or not you like this particular style or not. But it's something I've kind of noticed now, and I think if I were to reread the books again, I would probably see it a lot more, that he intentionally skips a couple of steps so he can fill in the steps, which is an interesting way to kind of get to the bigger parts. But what we have here is Nora is captured in some sort of, like, Mad Max Thunderdome like space, and she's been separated from Jazz because, of course, Jazz has a bounty on her head. The Empire still needs money, so the Empire has turned Jazz in for the bounty and has kept the two apart. Nora is completely beaten down. I mean, she's running on vengeance at this point. Like, it's the sheer willpower that she wants to see Sloane undone. That's pretty much what's going on here. I mean, she's dehydrated, she doesn't have water, she's drinking, like, sludge. The sludge they describe, I think, is the same kind of stuff that you see Finn drinking in The Force Awakens, and it's serious. Like, I can't even watch that part in The Force Awakens. It's so gross. And so, like, to read it and know that's what's going on is just really nasty, even though it's kind of another cool tie-in to The Force Awakens. But it's nasty. Like, everything that Nora is surrounded by is nasty. And it's like, what is the Empire even doing here? Which we do get the answer to that question. We're just not there yet. But her sanity is starting to slip, and she sees a vision of Singer and Timon kind of, like, haunting her as she's trapped. And of course, because she has this vision, she doesn't realize that she really has a rescuer, and that Bones finally shows up. We knew Bones was there. We hadn't seen Bones in a while. And this is kind of a heartbreaking scene, because Bones is just, like, ripped apart. It's so hard to read because Bones has been so BA, and he's obviously been captured, so something happened there. Again, another story that, that's a point in the story that we don't even really get to see. But he has this restraining bolt on him, and we just watch this, we read this droid just mowed down in front of Nora. And that's a big point for Nora as well, because now she's isolated. And Bones represents to her, or at least I would imagine represents to her, something really intense because it's her son's droid. So not only is it like an entity that she's been around a lot, I don't know that she necessarily sees Bones as part of the family or sees droids in that way, but he's certainly a staple. But he's also something that is her son's, something that would only have gotten sent after her because of her son. So there's a lot going on for Nora, and then just hard to read in general, because Bones is pretty much my favorite out of these books. Beyond that kind of scene, the big thing is really that Nora just finally is kind of hitting that rock bottom point. Like she has no hope. The one hope she didn't even know she had has now been taken down in front of her. And she's not really sure where to go from here. And that takes us to chapter 13, where we see Jazz. The chapter opens from Swift's point of view. Swift is the one who's sent to get her after they had their encounter earlier on Taris. Again, Nima's palace is just horrifying. Like, I just kind of keep going back to this Mad Maxian kind of place. Especially the way this is kind of described, kind of like a Fury Road kind of look to things, is how I imagine it. And Swift is just kind of like, he thinks he finally came around. Like, he got outsmarted and outmatched earlier in the book, and now he's outsmarted and he's outmatched, and he's describing all these things. And I really like how they keep going back to this idea of rope. Like, he's just like, they have rope. Like, they don't even have real cuffs. They have this rope stuff, and it's a big deal over and over again that it's rope. And he even sees the detail of Jazz's hair is matted over. And that's when we figure out that all of these details are relevant because Jazz she's intense. So Jazz has ripped 3 of her own horns off of her head that a Zabrak would have, and is using them uses them to fight Swift. And part of me is like, this is so BA, and part of me is like, this is so disgusting and painful, and it like gave me a headache to read. So like, this has been the chapter of me getting a sensory overload just by reading it, this set of reading anyway. But man, and then Jazz like fights off like Swift and a bunch of like the other dudes, the Nima's people. She fights all of them off single-handedly with like her own horns in her hand, and it's crazy. So then she's able to get out of her rope and get away. And at this point in the chapter, we take over from Jazz's point of view, and she is going through the tunnels, and I really like how she's able to figure it out. Like she's running through, and she realizes the tunnels don't necessarily go in any kind of logical direction. They're carved out in like a worming sort of way, and they kind of go all of these different ways. So she eventually finds where she needs to go by smell and by hearing, which shows like Jazz really does have all of these skills. She fights off more of the little minion people, and eventually gets to the ship. And then at the ship is one Embo. Embo is one of my all-time favorite Star Wars characters, definitely my favorite bounty hunter, and one of the best things to come out of the Clone Wars. I love everything about Embo and his fun spinny hat. So Embo showing up in the story is great, and of course it makes total sense because he would have been friends with Jazz's aunt Sugi, and that really kind of gets pulled in here as well. What we find out is that Embo knew that he was tracking Jazz. He knew why he was along for the ride. This part we get from Jazz's perspective, and it makes sense that we get it from Jazz's perspective, but man, I would love like some kind of story that's Embo's side of things, where he learns that he's going after Jazz, who's this person that he's had this strong connection to, this person that he's always liked, this niece of someone he used to like have in his crew that he was loyal to. And like, where does Embo find himself now that he needs the credits from whatever it is they're doing to go against Jazz? Like, he makes such a big point about like not being alone and like having a crew. Like, that's Embo versus Jazz, who's getting used to having a crew. And like, I want to know what dire straits is he finding himself in, or has just enough time passed that he figures like, maybe it's not personal anymore. Like, I would love to know his side of it. But at the same time, I think not getting his side of it makes it more tense and more poignant. And the story really isn't about him. The story is about Jazz, so it makes sense. But like, it would have been nice to get like a nice little Star Wars Insider short story of Embo's perspective or something like that. And something else that Jazz points out is that Swift is specifically picking bounty hunters that have a tie to Jazz's past. In this case, Imbo, and as we see eventually, Dengar, who both have connections to Sugi. I'm not sure if it was set up to be this is intentional on Swift's part, or if this is just kind of how fate has drawn its cards. But either way, it is an interesting point. Another thing I thought was kind of interesting is Jazz specifically says that Imbo reminds her of Jom, that kind of like strong, tough, gruff guy with the heart of gold. And some of this could just be her projecting because she misses Jom. But it's also kind of interesting because I feel like, Jazz doesn't really talk about her parents. She talks about Sugi all the time. And Imbo presumably could have fulfilled at least one kind of male mentor in her life. So it's kind of a sweet moment in a way, and I think it adds to real feelings she would have for Jom, that she is seeing that connection to Jom in a male role model. Whether or not that's really there as much as she thinks it is, or if that's there because of the relationship she wants to be in that she's denying to herself, I'm not sure. Another kind of bummer here is we learn that Imbo's pet Anuba is passed. His cool space dog that he always has with him in all of the episodes. But I mean, time has passed. It makes sense. But that was a sour note, I suppose. Then we go to Interlude 3, which is on Tatooine. We are back with Vance Cobb, previously seen in the 13th interlude in the first Aftermath book. That's the one on the Jawa Sandcrawler where he gets the Mandalorian armor. And Interlude 6 in Life Debt, that is the one where I believe he meets up with the Beastmaster from Jabba's palace, and they start raising a hut. And so here we have his kind of third installment. His town in Tatooine that he's kind of carved out for himself is being attacked by a crime syndicate called the Red Key. So this is another story that's serving to show that in the power vacuum of the Empire, that has come from the Empire kind of falling and disintegrating, that the New Republic has not fully filled, that crime is on the rise. There's also this vacuum from Jabba the Hutt that is allowing other kind of crime syndicates to pop up. So I like this again because it's another one of those interludes that really shows the state of the galaxy right now, and it's something that I find really interesting. The actual plot is Cobb is captured. He is being taunted by the leader of the Red Key, who is really after, he's trying to figure out what Cobb is all about. Cobb says that he wants freedom for people. He's not searching for power. The Red Key guy doesn't believe him. He's like, you're raising up a hut. You're doing all these other things. That doesn't make sense. You must really want power. What's cool is how they get out of this is they work with the Sand People. So Red Key guy is like, you want to install this hut that you're raising so that you can have like a what's the word? Figurehead. The word's figurehead. So they can have this figurehead hut, but really, because of how they are living within the environment on Tatooine, that they are being nice, they have this Beastmaster taking care of the different creatures and stuff, he's actually able to work out a deal with the Sand People who don't like the Red Key, don't like that they're slavers, that sort of thing. The Sand People come in at the end of the day and like wipe out the crime syndicate that's there, and that was a really cool scene. And it's just interesting to actually see the Sand People joining with people on Tatooine instead of fighting against them for a change, and it's showing how strange the landscape is on that planet right now. And then a kind of last note that I found interesting there is the Red Key guy talks about how like the true resource on Tatooine is its people. That there's some ore you can get there, and there's different things, but really it's like the people, the stock, the legacy of Tatooine. And I couldn't tell if he specifically meant like people know that Anakin came from Tatooine and Luke came from Tatooine, and like there's this legend of Tatooine, and that's what they meant, or if it was really just a slight at Cobb, like just a way to be like, I'm gonna take what you're worried about most, which is the people, because otherwise I'm not really sure what the meaning of that statement is, though it is an interesting statement to be sure. One thing that's kind of interesting here with Cobb Vanth is some people have speculated that he might be in some way tied to the Mandalorian TV show, which we don't currently know. I'm pretty sure the Mandalorian played by Pedro Pascal, is going to be like a new character. I don't think he's going to be Cobb Vanth, but it is something similar, like this guy walking around in Mandalorian armor, just kind of handling things and doing things. Obviously, Vanth isn't a real Mandalorian. We don't technically know whether or not Pedro Pascal's Mandalorian is going to be a true Mandalorian either, or if he just kind of adopts it because of the armor. So it's kind of interesting just to see. I feel like Cobb is a type of character that could appear in the show, but that's just speculation. It would be cool to see that tie-in, but I don't know if we're going to get it. But that's what I have to say for this week. Please let me know in the comments what you thought. I always enjoy talking to you guys about this sort of thing. How did you respond to all of the different things going on in these chapters? For next week, let's read chapters 14, 15, and 16. So that'll be 3 regular chapters, and I can tell you right off the bat, you don't have to read too far before we get some good news, but that's all I'll say going forward. But with that, I'm gonna call the video here. If you're not already, please consider following us on the various social medias and maybe even like the video on your way out. And I will talk to you guys about Aftermath next week.